Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks for coming and joining us this afternoon. You're with Rainbow Health Victoria and the Queer Family Violence Sector Network Service in the Spotlight event. So we run these every month. People I haven't met before, my name's Amelia. My pronouns are she and her. I'd like to welcome you to today's event alongside my colleague, Matt from Rainbow Health Victoria. So before we begin this Service in the Spotlight session, I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we're zooming in from, we are on stolen and unceded lands. For me, I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I'd like to extend my respects to the elders past, present and future, and also extend that respect to any First Nations folks who are joining us in this session today. If you'd like to acknowledge the land that you're on, you can feel free to do that in the chat. You can also add the owners of the traditional lands that you're zooming in from in your Zoom name. Matt will helpfully drop those resources in the chat for you if that's something that you've not done before. So for those who haven't come along to one of our Service in the Spotlight sessions before, they're run by Queer Family Violence Sector Network. We meet collaboratively, frequently, every few months or so, and we run these sessions monthly to platform what work is happening in the space around creating affirming environments for LGBTIQA+ folks in the family violence arena. If you've not heard of Rainbow Health before, we are the research to practice arm of the Australian Research Centre in Sex Health and Society, which means that we translate the research that's done at Archers into resources that people in direct practice, such as yourselves, can utilise. So today we're going to be hearing from Tammy, Sylvia and Tilly about the fantastic work that's happening in the Family Violence Restorative Justice Service. So the Family Violence Restorative Justice Service facilitates restorative conversations for victims and victim survivors of family violence. The staff who we'll be hearing from today support survivors and victims of family violence to talk about the harms that they've experienced in order to move forward with their experience of family violence. So I'm going to be handing over now to Tammy, Sylvia and Tilly, and they're going to be taking us through their important work. So thank you folks for being here.
Thank you, Amelia. Tammy, I think, will share her screen and I will kick us off. My name's Tilly O'Rourke. My pronouns are she, her. And just, you know, following on from Amelia's acknowledgement of country, I want to acknowledge the land on which I am, which is Wurundjeri, the land of the Wurundjeri people. Oh, what's going on? Sorry. And acknowledge, pay respect to their elders past and present. I also would like to acknowledge victim survivors for their courage and the contribution that they've made to the body of knowledge and improvement in practice in the family violence sector that we've experienced so far. I am a senior project officer with the Family Violence Restorative Justice Service, and today, Tammy, Sylvia and I will be having a bit of a chat with you about what restorative justice or restorative practice actually is, because sometimes that can get a bit muddled or people have heard about it, but they don't really know exactly what that means. And then we will take that a little bit deeper into how the Family Violence Restorative Justice Service works and how we utilise restorative practice in our work with victim survivors of family violence. Once we've talked about that, we'll have a little chat about how engagement looks from a service provider's perspective and also for the client and for participants, and walk you through what that engagement might look like and what our practitioners are doing throughout that process. And then we'll take you through a case study. We've found it's really helpful to talk through a case study with most of the groups we meet with, because with our service, it's quite unique and it's not for everybody, but sometimes it's for people you wouldn't necessarily think of in the first instance. And the situations that we are working with might actually be a little bit different to what you first consider when you think about referring someone into a service like this. We did have a interactive new little app that's part of PowerPoint that Tammy discovered called Slido, which is that little QR code you're seeing there. However, given the group is a little bit smaller, it actually probably allows for a bit more interaction in the group rather than having to sort of get everyone to do it through an app. So we might leave that off this time, I think. So now I will hand you over to Tammy to kick things off.
Thank you so much. So I'm Tammy. I'm a social worker by trade, and my role with the service is specialist support worker. So just bear with me while So I guess we just wanted to start a conversation with what's people's understanding of restorative justice is. And so I guess I just want people to cast their mind and have a think about, you know, where they might have heard the term restorative justice before, and what their initial thoughts are about it. I don't know if there's anyone here in the session with us who've come across restorative justice before. Any thoughts that you might have? You can, you're welcome to, to pop yourself off mute and say anything, or you can just put some words in the chat if you want. And in particular, we're just interested in, like how people would rate their understanding of restorative justice as well. So I'll skip the slide. Okay.
Do you want us to do this now, Tammy?
Yeah, like, do you have any thoughts of, like, when you think about restorative justice, like any thoughts that you might have, or where
I'm happy to chat to it. It's always a little bit awkward. You don't want to take up too much space, but when there's sort of only 3 participants, you're like, if I don't, that's awkward too. So for me, I've been involved in family violence for a long time. I've come along today because I was actually on the initial advisory groups for this project when I used to work in the magistrates courts. So I then left the courts and I'm now in health and mental health. So I was curious as to where the projects actually ended up. And so my understanding, because I was in that space, is pretty decent, because I think that's part of the conversation when you talk about restorative justice in family violence. It's a pretty sensitive topic, I think, because people get, they've certainly got their own connotations for me. So for me, it's also, I guess, about some of the models which have sort of happened. My understanding is being informed by some of the work that was happening in New Zealand as well, and also in the youth justice space around that sort of stuff too. And, what was also happening in prisons.
Yes, you're spot on. In terms of, like, I guess in Australia, a lot of restorative justice has been in the youth justice space. And then in other countries, such as in Europe and definitely in New Zealand, restorative justice, or sometimes we call it RJ for short, has been used in other contexts outside of youth justice, such as for sexual assault matters, and in more recent times in family violence cases as well. Yeah. So I guess, like, these, when we talk about justice, there's we have our traditional justice system, and then I guess there's also another, like, and restorative justice is another model. So it's not to say that one model is better than another. I think there's space in our society for both systems to work alongside each other. So when we think about traditional justice, a lot of academics also term it as being retributive justice as well. So if we think about some of the cases or some of the clients that the family violence sector has worked with, and think about, when they go through the justice system and what it looks like for them, often the justice system is concerned about with, well, like, what crime has been committed, who has done the offending, who's done the wrong thing, is there any evidence to support that, and what is the appropriate sentence or punishment that is available under the law. And I guess you know, if you think back to, you know, our service came out of the Royal Commission into Family Violence, and if we, you know, if we look back at that, we would see that a lot of victim survivors have gone through that model. While some people have found it to be really supportive and it was able to meet their needs, there are others who have found that system, I guess, quite sometimes quite difficult and challenging, and also it can also be traumatizing in itself as well. So restorative justice, in contrast to that, is concerned about not really about evidence, but more concerned about what happened, who are the people that's been affected. So that includes, you know, obviously victim survivors, the person who's caused harm, but also it could be much wider than that. So it could be family members that have also been affected, and it could also be in some cases communities as well. And restorative justice looks at how can things be set right. So it's about bringing people into a shared understanding about what's happened, what was the effect of the harm, and then looking at what can we all do to make things better for the victim survivor. And I'll hand this part over to my colleague Sylvia, who'll go into it further as well.
Tammy, is the slide all right? It's not coming. Can you see? Oh, good. Okay, cool. So when looking at restorative justice, so the common principles are pretty common in terms of when you think about programs and projects. So in terms of the overarching principles of restorative justice, it's the concept of doing no further harm. So in a way where we look at every situation or every, so when a victim survivor comes and says, provide us with some support or provide us with assistance in the conversation, our primary principle is that we would not be doing any further harm to the already experience of family violence. It's voluntary, so we don't really force anybody to participate. And it's about explaining the program in a way that piques interest. So if we, for example, want to, somebody involving who's used family violence, it's about informing them about the program and some of the benefits that they can participate in it, as opposed to going, it's voluntary, you don't have to participate, it's going, these are some of the benefits you might get. And in a way, kind of describing the program in a way that it's about setting relationships right. And that includes within themselves. So a lot of victim survivors look at, they feel like this stuckness or this load that's within themselves going, maybe I did something wrong, maybe this, maybe that. A lot of victim survivors feel that. It's about going, how can we work through that relationship that you have within yourself, but also looking at how we can set relationships right with other people. So with their family, with the person who used family violence, with their communities, and it's working with where they're at in the journey, providing them with a sort of a basis and a level of support going, this is where you're at in your journey. What is it that you want to achieve? And how can we support you? And where is it that, and what is that stuckness about, and how can we kind of explore through it? The people who participate, people who've been affected, so victim survivors, the person who used family violence, their families, their friends, their community. And it's about people being involved who can provide insight. So insight into the actual incidences of family violence or into the experiences of family violence. And oversight is we can be able to have like a psychologist or a family violence practitioner come in and say, actually what the victim survivor is describing is family violence, and sort of like giving that oversight in terms of having like an expert, and also some support in a way where we can be able to have like people who've used family violence have their men's behavior change program, leader attend and say, I have seen them, take ownership. I've seen them through all the journey of family violence. This is where they're at. And also people who have a stake in making things better. So for example, with that, we look at grandparents, parents who are sort of have been participating in caring for the kids who, they have seen how the kids have been impacted and how they have a stake in making things better as well. So what does preparation look like? or what does the process look like? So initially it's about an intake, so where we do like demographics, collect information about, people, and start that rapport building. So we get to know who the victim survivor is initially, what they're hoping to achieve, why they've been referred to us. We talk about some of that of what is it that they're hoping to achieve by having a conversation, who they want to have that conversation with, why they feel that's the right person. Are they thinking other people? Who else do they think might be involved? Who might provide support? And it's pretty much about also creating support around the victim survivor. So it could be support by us, so our role as specialist support workers, as well as it would be to provide support in terms of doing MARAMs. So from the very beginning would be risk assessments to make sure that if the case is high risk, how risk is going to be taken care of, how we're going to be managing safety as well, and how pretty much having a really clear understanding of what family violence looked like for that victim survivor. Is it sometimes when he's put his hands on the table, what does that look like? That emotional abuse, just making sure that we're really on top with what the experience of family violence has been. And in the process, creating rapport and building trust and making sure that we're able to go on the journey with the victim survivor. So once we finish sort of like getting to know that, it will be about introducing the convener as well. So introducing the convener to the victim survivor, as well as preparing everybody else in the preparation. So understanding that it's a democratic space in terms of everybody has the victim survivor's story is the one that we build on, but everybody else brings their voice into the conversation. That the facilitation is done by a skilled convener, and their job is to be impartial to the whole process. So while the specialist support worker's job is to support the victim survivor and believe their story and create support, the facilitator is just about convening the whole conversation and making sure that everybody has been asked about what has happened, how have people been affected, and to achieve to using that collective vulnerability to have a really clear shared understanding, and that's where that emotional transformation happens.
Just to give a little bit of background on our service and some of the specifics around how we work compared to other restorative justice programs. So as Tammy mentioned earlier, we were a recommendation from the Royal Commission into Family Violence because the Commission heard from victim survivors of family violence that they were often going through the traditional justice system and feeling as though they had actually not been heard through that process, that their feelings, their wishes, their experiences had not really been acknowledged, and they came out the other end feeling absolutely no sense of justice or closure, or as though they had been able to tell their story. And so the recommendation was that a family violence focused restorative justice program was developed with victims at its centre, and ensuring that it was really highly supportive, managing risk really thoroughly, and properly resourced so that all of those risks and the needs of the victim survivor could be managed in a way that was sustainable. That resulted in an 18-month pilot that we ran from October 2018 until May 2020. And throughout that period, we went through, the typical kind of teething pains and growing pains. And, we had to iron out some wrinkles. Through experience, we discovered that some of the things that we'd set up, for instance, referral pathways, weren't as effective as we thought they might be. So initially, the program was set up to have referrals made out of services that worked in magistrates' courts, Heidelberg and Geelong specifically. And we realised over time that the services working in those courts were actually working with victim survivors who were at a pretty critical point, like a crisis point in their journey. They weren't in a headspace to be considering what they needed to kind of start moving forward from their experience. They were still kind of having their needs met. And so that wasn't the best approach for us. We also weren't accepting self-referrals initially, because the thought process behind that was that we needed victim survivors to be coming into the program with a bit of a support behind them. So being referred in by a supporting service, so that we knew that they were kind of going to have someone else, a case manager or another service, supporting the needs that we couldn't. But what we discovered is that a lot of the victim survivors who were contacting our service to self-refer were actually quite a few years past the crisis point of their experience. And they'd been doing a lot of reflecting and feeling as though things weren't right, relationships weren't right, and they wanted to do something, whether it be speak with family, speak with the perpetrator, speak with an institution about how they felt they had inappropriately handled their case, and they were ready to have that conversation. They didn't necessarily need to be working with a case manager or a service provider to do that. So we opened up to self-referrals, and actually that is now a third of our referrals are self-referrals. So we've come a long way in the way that we talk about the service that we provide and the way we find those people that will actually benefit from this service. Part of that was also putting a lot more time and energy into educating the community and the family violence sector, and actually more broadly, service providers on the whole. We've provided workshops to hospitals and to really varied organizations who are actually quite interested, law firms. And yeah, it's been really fascinating. And I think what we've come to realize is that victim survivors who are in a position that they want to engage with a service like ours could be at any stage of their journey and could be engaged with services or may not be. And we have become a lot more responsive to that through our experience and to listening to our referrals and the people who are referred, and also the clients that we work with. Sylvia touched on principles a little bit, like general principles to restorative practice around do no further harm, being voluntary, etc. For us, we have 7 key principles that drive our work. Those you can find in our framework. If you'd like to have a look at that, we can send it through to you. It's also online. But the key ones I might just touch on here are victim-centered, perpetrator acceptance of responsibility, and do no further harm. So again, Sylvia touched on do no further harm, and that is absolutely at the core of our work. And that's not just for the victim survivor, that's for all participants. So if we are working with a perpetrator, it is absolutely fundamental to our work that person is supported in a way that helps them achieve accountability and take responsibility for their behaviour. And that kind of leads us into the perpetrator acceptance of responsibility. So if a victim survivor wants the person who's used family violence to be involved, our practitioners will assess that perpetrator throughout their entire engagement with the program, always looking for potential risk and making sure they're utilising the MARAM for that. In order to be involved, the perpetrator has to accept responsibility for using family violence before that they are assessed as ready to participate. And that's really critical. And I think one of the really wonderful things about the service that we provide is that a successful restorative conversation does not need to involve a perpetrator to be beneficial to a victim survivor. They may well get just as much benefit from working with the specialist support workers to the point where they realise they don't need to talk to anyone, which is an experience that Sylvia has had. Or they realise it's not actually the perpetrator, it's actually the perpetrator's family or their own family. It's a really organic and flexible process. And if the perpetrator is involved, it's very, very, very thoroughly monitored. And then, of course, at the core of our work is victim-centeredness. And that means that our program is designed to deliver benefit to the victim survivor. Restorative justice more broadly is a bit of a three-pronged approach. It's about the victim, it's about the perpetrator, and it's about the community, and equal outcomes for everyone. For us, it's hopefully everyone who is involved benefits, but number one is the victim survivor. And so they get to decide who participates, how quickly their engagement progresses, the nature of their engagement, what restorative conversations are had, because in our program, we are not limited to just one restorative conversation, which is what we call our process, by the way. It's called a restorative conversation. A victim survivor may actually need to have 1, 2, 3, depending on what relationships they're wanting to set right. And, that might include an initial restorative conversation with family members so that everyone's prepared to go into a conversation with the person who used violence. Or it might be a follow-up with family after having a conversation with the person who used violence, or any number of, engagements. It is entirely dependent on the person and the experience that they've had. And just, we probably should have touched on this a little bit earlier, but essentially we've got the team that's made up of conveners and specialist support workers. So the specialist support workers lead the initial prep work with victim survivors. And part of that is building trust and rapport with them and ensuring all risk assessments are conducted. And, we are ensuring we're part of the information sharing scheme. So we're making sure we're engaging in that as well. They also work with a perpetrator. So there'll be a separate specialist support worker to work with the perpetrator where they're engaged as well. And we'll be continually doing those risk assessments. Then we have the conveners, and they support the telling of the story. So they will meet with the participants and the victim survivor to help them identify their goals for engagement and who else might participate. The convener assesses participants' readiness for the conversation and leads the conversation in the process when it happens. Now I'll hand you over to Sylvia.
Sorry, Tammy, can I just look at the past slide? I just want to make one, just the last point being the trauma-informed and recognizing the impacts of family violence, as well as, I'll come back to that. So the other thing we're just going to talk about is collaborating with other stakeholders and other services. So part of it is involving like family violence organizations, LGBTI other organizations, just in terms of providing us with some extra specific knowledge. So if we're working, for example, with a perpetrator and we're thinking, oh, maybe, he has attended the men's behavior change program, but we think that he might need some extra support or extra services to be involved. Part of it is an understanding that we can't be experts in everything. So we involve other organizations in terms of providing us sort of like secondary consultations and expert opinions and extra expert support, not only in supporting the participants or victim survivors, but also in being part of the conversation. So if we feel that, one of the participants is really needs some support in understanding, for example, that emotional abuse is family violence, we might bring a family violence expert to talk more about what emotional abuse is as part of the conversation. As well as an understanding that, and it's part of an integrated justice system. So the family violence response system is like, if a victim comes to us and we think that they're in a crisis point and they need to be talking to a family violence organization to get housing, for example, we are going to be linking them back in to kind of go back to the beginning and work back to coming back to us. So we might be able to be like, this might not be the right time for you in terms of a family violence incident just happened yesterday. There's no intervention or so we actually might be able to send victims back to the beginning to get that crisis support and then come back to us. So if we do get somebody who's a self-referral who we think might benefit from some of those organizations, before they can have our conversations, the specialist support worker role is to take them back and then back on the journey and do the referrals and kind of do that immediate support as well. The last thing is just about our trauma-informed practice and recognizing its impact on family violence. Thank you, Tammy. Next slide. Tammy, did you want to add anything else onto that slide?
No, I think you covered it really well, Sylvia. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is just sort of a slide that we've always had. I'm sure all of you are experts in trauma-informed practice, but I always feel like it's really good to mention that in order for us to do no further harm, part of it is adhering to trauma, the principles of being trauma-informed. So in terms of discussing what safety is for every victim survivor, and talk about physical safety as well as emotional safety. In terms of the trustworthiness, in terms of being consistent, reliable, and honest in providing our service from the very beginning. So in terms of from intake all the way through to preparation, and understanding that our message is going to be really consistent about what restorative justice can and cannot provide. Being really honest about if we see the risk is increasing, if we think maybe it's time to have a pause, maybe we recognize that our victim survivor is struggling from mental health or drugs and alcohol, anything like that, just be really honest and saying it's time for a pause, and then we'll link you into support services. And making sure that the client is at the center of all decision making. So from the very beginning, whether they want to be intaked or throughout the process, about who they want to be involved. And why they want that person involved. If we feel that that person is causing any risk or harm to them, just being really open and being collaborative in terms of that conversation, always involving the victim survivor, being at the center of it. And where we work, we do things with them rather than to or for them, for the clients. And in terms of empowerment, being active in the service process and their own recovery. So being part of their story and their journey with them, in terms of at every point of wherever they are with their journey, we're going to be sort of like drawing that back to the restorative justice conversation in a way where we can have an understanding that if there's one particular incident that we think will be good to bring up in a conversation that's going to be really important to their recovery, bringing that to be as part of the conversation in terms of helping them to understand where they're at and where they're going. Thanks, Tammy. So what does engagement look like? So the victim survivor is referred to our organization. So they normally would be either self-referral, as I think Tammy or Tilly said. So they send us an email saying, I need some support, I need someone to talk to me about it. Or an agency that we've worked with before that might know something about restorative justice or might not, but what they would be looking is, or the client that they would have is somebody who is feeling stuck and is feeling that I've experienced family violence, but I really want to repair relationship with the person who used family violence, my family, my friends. I really feel that there's something about my experience that they could have provided better, or something that I did that I want to have a conversation about. And they're feeling that they're not able to do that by themselves. So they feel like either because they've tried in the past and it didn't go well, or that for some reason they're feeling that they're afraid to start. They're like, I want to say this and this and this, but I'm afraid to. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to start. Or they feel like I've done it before, but I feel like I need extra support, or I need somebody to actually facilitate the conversation, or somebody to just make sure that what I want to say and how I say it. So a lot of victim survivors say, there's a lot of things that I want to say, but I want somebody to help me like organize what that is and how it looks like. So it's about doing that. So what we do is that we assess all potential participants for participation in terms of what they're hoping to achieve, and if restorative justice can help them, or restorative practice can help them with that. So in terms of going, I want to tell them this and this and this, and going back to be like, can the process actually facilitate, or can it help with that particular conversation? And what preparation means is that we speak to the victim survivor about what they want to achieve, what they want to reach, and some of the topics that they want to discuss, who they want to talk to, why they want to talk to that person, what they want to say to that person. And then it's about preparing for that conversation, that by the time we're all getting into that meeting. Or the other thing about that is also preparing other participants. So after we've prepared the victim survivors, we then go to prepare other participants. So a victim identifies that I want to talk to my mom, who I didn't feel was supportive, or who I didn't believe. Every time I went and told her I was experiencing family violence, she didn't believe me. So we'll give mom a call and say, how do we prepare you for the conversation? Your daughter wants to have a conversation with you, or your son wants to have a conversation with you. Then we prepare mom for that conversation. And the whole thing is about having everybody come into the restorative conversation when they are prepared and they know what to expect and what is going to be said. And sort of like in terms of preparing where we are going to meet, what time, who's going to be sitting where, in terms of like in the actual room, what time they're going to arrive. So just being really down to the very details of the particular day. And then after that, having follow-up to contact the victim survivor and other participants as required, in terms of providing support and debriefing after, where they can be able to be talked to about where they're at, how they feel like they might have started at the very beginning going, I'm not sure how I'm going to feel, and at the end going, that was really beneficial, that was really helpful, this really stuck with me, and providing support after that. The other thing to note as well is that it's not a linear process. Like we don't go number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Sometimes we go, we've done an assessment and we started preparation, then we realize that it might be good to have a mini restorative conversation, maybe for example, between mom and daughter before they come into the bigger conversation, or between the person who used family violence and the victim before they come to, maybe for example, to speak to the whole family about it. So it's not necessarily like we go, it's not a linear. It can sometimes, we can have conversations, mini conversations before the main conversation. So as Tammy said, or Tilly said, we can have as many conversations as we need to for the victim survivor to feel that she or they have achieved what they're out to want to achieve. Next slide. Is this for you?
I kind of spoke to this before anyway, Sylvia, just the fact that we're complementary. We're part of a suite of services available to victim survivors, and we want to work hand in hand with those who refer clients to us. But yeah, I think mostly we've covered this off anyway.
Yeah, so yeah, that'll be good.
Are there any questions before we go into a case study? Because we just wanted to give people a case example, of restorative justice and how we work with clients. So.
Yeah, I just had a question. So from when you're talking about during the pilot program, the different kind of times that people were entering. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. So this is something that people could service people could access, like even after criminal proceedings have happened.
Anytime. So our eligibility is that a victim survivor isn't on a ramp, so they're not at sort of crisis point and incredibly high risk, and that risk is being managed, and that there are no ongoing criminal proceedings in court. Other than that, we are able to work with people at any stage of their involvement in their family violence journey, basically.
Yeah, so just to go back on that, like sometimes people might have gone all the way through the justice system process. An example, is a sexual abuse matter. Sometimes people might take that all the way through the court, regardless of whether a conviction was made or whether the matter didn't proceed. The victim survivor can still elect to have a restorative conversation as well. Because as we all know, like if we look back on, like people that we've supported or cases where we've heard about that have gone through the court system, sometimes people don't get the answers that they need, even where, a conviction's be made, because I guess in the traditional justice system, a victim survivor is seen as a witness to their own matter. They're not at the center of that case. They're a witness to the Crown. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. So should we just hold on a second. I'll go to, so this is a case study, and this is just the background of Indy. And so, yeah, I can read it out, and then I think Sylvia and Tilly will talk more about it. So Indy is a university student, and she identifies as being a lesbian. She began seeing a counsellor after a relationship breakdown, and she identified that there was a pattern in her intimate relationships that she wasn't happy with. And that was, she thought, she felt that she was always putting her needs second to her partner's. And as a result, a dynamic would develop where she felt that she was always trying to please her partner, but that the relationship was never equal. After some counsel, after a number of sessions, Indy became aware that she had many unresolved issues relating to abuse in her childhood, and that she wanted to focus on those things with her counsellor. Eventually, Indy was referred to our service from the counselling service, and that was because she wanted to discuss her experience of sexual abuse from her older brother with the family. In particular, she suspected that her parents had known all along that the abuse was occurring, and yet they didn't do anything to protect her or to support her, and that was quite hurtful for her. She wanted them, as well as her brothers, to know about the impact of that abuse on her. And through counselling, she was able to make the connections that the sexual abuse in her childhood, left her with feelings of shame, insecurities, and low self-worth.
Tammy. So now Sylvia and I are going to go through this. I'm going to interview Sylvia, and Sylvia is speaking from the position of being Indy's specialist support worker and her work with Indy. So, Sylvia, what type of preparation work did you do with Indy when you're engaged with her?
Sure, thanks, Tilly. So initially, when I initially talked to Indy, it was about talking to her about the program. So in terms of what restorative justice it is and what it provides, so in terms of just giving her information about restorative justice and about the program and about what she can benefit from it. And then I gave her some time to go away and think about whether some of the things that we talked about had stuck with her, and maybe even speak to friends if she had any about what she hoped, whether she hoped that to achieve would be met by restorative justice. So explaining things like it's voluntary, it's about creating a conversation, about the preparation time, about getting to know her story. So once I'd given her that sort of information, she went off and called me back in a couple of days and said, Sylvia, I'm really interested. And she had a couple of questions about consent. She was like, oh, are you going to be sharing my story with everybody? So I answered those by saying, the confidentiality in terms of the confidentiality clause. And we talked about safety and risk as well. So that's another question that she had. She's like, what about, if something happens to me? So we talked about risk and safety again. And at the same time, we talked about that it's a very intense and long process. So she was wondering about whether she could meet with her family like the next week. And I was like, it's a long and intense process because of the preparation. And it's also about making sure that she's got formal and informal supports. So for example, I was really curious to find out whether she was still going to be continuing with the counseling so that she can be able to have some extra support, some professional support after we were able to meet. So she said she did have a couple of friends. And it's also talking about, so that initial is just talking about her getting to know how she reacts to the story, how the story makes her feel, when to say, to be able to identify that I have been talking to you guys for a while now, I feel like I need a break, or I'm ready to keep going, or this is really making me feel empowered and I'm feeling like I'm getting stronger. So it's just about keeping in track with that in terms of that initial period. And then after a while, we introduced the convener. So the convener joined the conversation, and their role was to start to get to know the story of what Indy wanted to present, and who she wanted to talk to, what she wanted to tell them, what impacts it was going to be having on her. And so she was thinking, who do I want to involve in the story? And in terms of what she was hoping to achieve from them as well.
Great. Sounds pretty comprehensive. And so what was Indy hoping to achieve through the restorative conversation that she has with her family?
Sure. So from the very beginning, Indy was very interested and specifically wanted to speak to her older brother, the one who had sexually abused her. But she also she was wanting to bring together her family, so her parents and her younger brother, in terms of going she wanted to be able to have a safe relationships. And she also wanted to in particular, she wanted to have an ability to trust people, and an ability to feel safe in relationships. She always felt that she wasn't worthy of having a loving relationships, and she wasn't able to ever understand why. And she carried a lot of feelings about shame for her body and her sexuality as well. And she always felt that this came from somewhere, and it came from being a victim of sexual assault, but she really did not know where to take that. Like, she was really, in terms of, she knew her parents, she suspected that they knew about the sexual assault, and this really hurt her, and she wanted to ask us particular questions about that. To her brother, the person who she caused harm, she wanted to know why he did this to her. So during the preparation process, it became really clear about that this may not, that, you know, her brother might not have been able to provide the answers. The brother who sexually abused her might not be able to provide the answers, because he was going, there were a lot of issues that were happening there, but this sort of went back to, but then she also talked about her younger brother who was involved, and he was like, I would also like an apology from my brother and from my parents, but she did not think that they had any expectations about this. And she was tired of having to carry that burden in the secret of the family as well. And she wanted to let that burden to go. And she was feeling like maybe talking to the family might finally make me feel that I'm not carrying this burden and this load over my shoulder all the time.
So which family members did end up being involved, and how did you approach them to participate in the process?
Sure. So India identified that she wanted to speak to her older brother, the one that caused harm, and her parents. She identified that she wanted to have a good relationship with her younger brother and believed that he had no knowledge of the sexual abuse. And he also wanted to be close to her older brother. She believed that it's important for her to be able to involve with him as part of the family, and also to keep, she was also tired of keeping secrets. So we spent a few meetings with Indy to work out how best to contact various family members. Indy wanted to contact her younger brother herself. She felt that she was comfortable to do that and thought that would be best. And then she wanted our service to make contact with her parents and elder brother. So initially, we, like on the day we were going to be making a call, we let Indy know that we're going to be calling her parents and her elder brother, just so that she can be aware that was happening, in case there was any extra phone calls or anything like that. So we made her aware. So because the program is voluntary, her elder brother declined to participate at this stage, and he said that he was going through difficulties in his life, and he was not in the space to participate. And we also assessed that if he wasn't in a good space, he wasn't going to be bringing any benefit. Her parents were anxious about the meeting, and they did not understand why India wanted to engage in this process. But through providing them with the information about the purpose of the meeting and what everything was going to be happening, they got a better understanding, and they agreed to attend. And her younger brother agreed to attend as well. So Indy did not have any support people that she had identified. So one of the specialist support workers was there to provide support for Indy. And we also put things in place where we'd have a meeting, we'd have support to provide before and after every meeting. So her psychologist should have an appointment like the next day or a couple of days after, just to make sure that after every meeting that there was a debrief and a check-in session to make sure that everything was all right.
And finally, how did Indy feel about her brother not attending, her older brother? Was it able to go ahead without him? What did that look like?
She was really disappointed that he wasn't able to attend. And there was a lot of emotion as to why he was not going to attend. But we spoke about some of the things that she was hoping to benefit, and whether where her brother was at that particular time, whether he was able to provide some of the things that she wanted to benefit. And we explained to her, and we provided information to her about why we felt at the time he wasn't going to be giving her, like he wasn't going, she wanted an apology, like at that point in his life, he wasn't able to be providing any of that, an apology or any of that support. And with an understanding that, so we were able to explain to her that she wasn't going to be achieving any of the things by him being involved because of where he was at with his, in his journey. But we also let her know that it was just at the present journey. So it was something that we can look after down the track. But we spoke about some of the things that she wanted to achieve with her parents and her brother, and how during preparation she was going to be able to achieve some of those things. And that with getting some of those things, you can go back to some of the things that she was hoping to achieve. It was going to really be a chunk of it was going to be talking to her parents about if they knew what was happening, and also having a relationship with her brother and what that looked like. So during the meeting, on the day, we prepared everybody to attend, and everybody knew where they were going to be meeting. And everybody, the parents and the brother attended the meeting. They had all knew the time and the place. So they all knew where they were going to be sitting. And we talked about the harm that had been caused. It was really beneficial. And after that, we had a debrief session with Indy as well.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm just wondering, at the end of the process, despite the perpetrator not being involved and potential for going into a conversation down the track, how did Indy feel coming out the other end of that process?
She felt really, because she felt really supported. And I think part of it was just that stuckness about her parents being aware of all the sexual assault and not doing anything about it, and her brother not being aware of what had happened. So I think at the end, that collective vulnerability of everybody being able to sort of talk about whether they knew or did not know, and what support she had wanted from them. Like, I think the outcome of it was that stuckness and that burden that she felt like she was carrying her whole life, the parents and the brother were able to kind of go, it's not really like sharing the burden, but having an understanding of what her experience was. So that understanding made her feel that what had happened had actually happened to her, and it wasn't just her story, and those kind of that collective vulnerability that they all felt together, in a way that everybody was kind of able to go, we're here to support you. What else that you need? How can we help you achieve that, in terms of that being really supportive of her in terms of how she defined herself and how she defined her story and how she defined where she wanted and what she wanted to achieve as well. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really positive outcome.
Tammy, did you want to add anything?
Mute.
No, sorry, it took me a while to unmute myself. I think, yeah,
Cool.
that's good. I don't know. Does the audience have any questions, or do people have any questions for us?
Yep, I'll take questions too.
Yeah, I think it's a good chance for people to jump in if they have any questions they'd like to ask or anything they'd like to clarify.
Yeah. I might just stop share for now.
I've got some questions. Thank you. That was really helpful. I think that it clarified some misconceptions for me. I had understood restorative justice as being a really either or sort of experience, and that it was, if the traditional justice system wasn't the route you wanted to go down, that you could go down this route instead. So it was nice to understand how it can be